Yes.
Welcome to the January meeting of the WEBRTC Working Group. Next slide. This working group abides by the W3C IPR policy, which is at the link above. And only people and companies listed at the other link are allowed to make substantive contributions to the WebRTC specs. Next. So today we'll be discussing captured surface control and grab bag. We have future meetings scheduled in February, March, and April. Next. So a little bit about the meeting. We have links to the slides published on the wiki. Do we have a scribe and volunteer for note taking?
Not a volunteer, but a scribe, yes.
Okay, thank you. The meeting is being recorded and it will be public. Next. A reminder about the code of conduct. We operate under the W3C Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct, so we're all passionate. Let's keep it professional and cordial. Next. I think you all know how to use Google Meet at this point, but raise your hand to get into the queue and lower the hand to get out of it. And please wait for the microphone access before speaking. Please don't jump the speaker queue and use a headphone or an echo canceling speakerphone to avoid echo. State your name before speaking. It helps with the note taking. And I don't think we'll be doing polls, but we might. Next. Just a little bit about document status. Just because something's hosted doesn't mean it's adopted. We have a call for adoption for that. And editor's drafts may not represent working group consensus, but working group drafts do. And if we merge stuff that lacks consensus, a note should be attached indicating the controversy. Next. Okay, so here's today's agenda. We have a lot with captured surface control. Then Yanabir is going to do a grab bag of different issues and PRs. We'll do the wrap up. So let's try to keep to time. We'll give you a warning about 2 minutes before the time's up, and then we'll move on. Thank you. Next. Okay, Elad, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm Elad Alon, and I'm here for Google talking about captured surface control. There's a full hour here, but there are multiple issues, so I'm gonna try to basically have some kind of internal structure. So apologies if at some point we get to, if it looks like a certain topic has taken too long, I will ask you guys to shelve it and for us to move forward. So, and with that, I'm gonna start. So first of all, captured surface control is an API that allows a web application that's capturing another tab to have very limited control over that application. And the reason is that sometimes when you're capturing another tab, for example, you just need to scroll a little down, or you want to change the zoom level, and you don't want to move away from the capturing application, start interacting with the other thing, then come back. And for very simple things like scrolling and for zoom control, we deemed it relatively safe to basically allow the capturing web application to forward some of the user's intentions and to allow the user to interact with the capturing application to do that. So to that end, there is capture controller that has two sets of capabilities, one for zoom control and one for scroll control. And we're going to talk about both today and discuss a couple of points of feedback that were given by people, mostly by UN and Yanivar, and see if we can make progress on that. So on we go. So the first thing is zoom control, and there are a couple of methods here, and I'm going to go through a couple of them and just explain what they do and some of the points of feedback that were given. Number one, we've got get zoom level. That's a simple getter. It basically gives you the current zoom level of the tab that you're capturing. It happens synchronously and it returns 100 if you're at the default zoom level. Then less than 100 means zoomed out and more than 100 means zoomed in. I hope I've not made a mistake. Maybe it's inverted, but right now is a bad time to check. And basically it kind of mimics CSS zoom, right? And in fact, for Chrome, it is implemented as CSS zoom. And the reason that we need that is that web applications like Meet, for example, want to show the user like a zoom in and zoom out button. And when you do that, it helps to also display the actual zoom number, because it's very idiomatic, right? When users see that, they immediately understand what those buttons do. And it also helps them keep track, right? If they, for example, set a zoom level that they liked, then they momentarily zoomed in 3 times, it helps them to just go back to 200 or whichever number they deemed, that was working generally well. Now, it goes even further than that. I'll just jump a couple of those. Because in Chrome, we can actually have the user interact with multiple different things that change the zoom level, then having this number fed back allows the user to understand, hey, this thing that I'm changing might be changing from a different source. So the fact that I didn't click this plus button, but suddenly it changed, they understand if there is a reflection of that. But I'm sorry, I'm jumping the gun here. So basically, we've got the get zoom level, and it's useful. And one piece of feedback that we got was a proposal from UN to make it a nullable attribute instead of a method. So some pros for that proposal would be that it's more, at least as I can understand it, is that it's more immediately clear that it can be read synchronously. When you see an attribute, it's immediate. When you see a method, you kind of need to look at the signature of the method. Either of those could be with or without side effects, but it's more idiomatic for something without side effects to basically be an attribute. And I think that the reason that UN suggested it to be nullable was that if you pass, if null is returned, it means unknown and or unchangeable zoom level. So some cons that I can think of here, and just spoiler alert, I'm not opposing this proposal, but just to try to consider both sides here, nullability could surprise developers if they only test the happy case, right? So let's say that they only test on Chrome and they capture a tab and it works and that's great, and the right code. Now this might not work on Safari, or if you capture a window or something like that. And I suggest that we might want to consider just returning 100 in that case, because then whatever code they wrote for tab capture implicitly also works for window capture and for future user agents. So to me, that seems a bit less error prone, but not a blocking concern from my point of view. So in that case, we could say, okay, it's going to be an attribute, either nullable or not nullable. And yeah, if anybody has got an opinion here, now would be a good time. I'm sorry, Yaniv, you went first.
Yeah, so I think it's attribute over method, I think is a good thing. So I support having it an attribute. Although I just want to point out that I think we had made at least on GitHub, I think we had made a little more progress on the forwarding events API and there's some bigger questions about where the API should live. Right here, we're talking about zoom level first, so I don't necessarily want to get ahead of discussing where this API belongs, but attribute over method, I think it's a good idea. As far as nullability, are you suggesting that it would just, instead of nullable, are you suggesting it would just default to 100?
So two things here, thank you. Number one, we have indeed discussed possibly exposing some things over video element. That was your suggestion. I don't think that there was consensus for that. And that was only for forwarding gestures. That was at no point was there any indication that zoom level should be exposed over the video element or any other element. So maybe you could explain what you mean here?
Well, I just that I thought we would discuss that first, but that's fine. We can come back to it. I just wanted to say that I don't necessarily. This slide suggests that it's on the capture controller. That's where it lives now in the spec, I guess. So the question here is whether we prefer an attribute or a method, and I prefer an attribute.
Okay, that's great. But I
Can
don't
explain
think
the nullable difference.
In 1 second, I just want to understand the other point, like if not on capture controller, where would zoom controls go? Because forward gestures, you've had some feedback there and I understand it, but this one I don't.
Well, what I'm saying is that later we're going to discuss so at least on GitHub, there's a proposal for putting the forward events API on the video element instead of the capture controller. And that might be a good discussion to have first.
I think that's
otherwise you end up with there's a separate question of if one of the API is on the video element and the other is on the capture controller, is that logical? Maybe, but it might also be logical to combine them in the same place.
It might, but this feedback was not given before. But okay, if we've got more time at the end of the 1 hour, maybe we can discuss that. So. Yanivar, if I understood correctly, you're happy with moving this to be an attribute, so that makes at least 3 of us as far as I can understand. With respect to nullability, I think, yes, I suggest just making it return 100 when you don't really have a concept of a zoom level. For example, if you're capturing the entire screen and it's an operating system that doesn't have the concept of a modifiable zoom level. But I'm okay either way. Does that answer all of your questions, Yanivar?
Yeah, I don't have a strong preference on nullable. I'm curious what Ewan thinks. But there's also other people on the list here. So
yes,
Colin
was next.
So maybe this isn't the right time to do it, but I was actually, I joined the call hoping to hear a little bit more about why this was safe. Because all the time we have things where people do things like, share a payroll spreadsheet, share a payroll web page, and they're trying to scroll to a section so that they're only displaying the portion that the people on the other side are supposed to see.
Okay.
So I didn't know if there'd been discussion about the safety on this or whatever. Obviously, I haven't been heavily involved. I haven't been involved with this deeply or whatever. It's not like I'm going to object or anything like that. But I was hoping to learn more about why people thought this was a reason, safe to add, basically.
Sure. So I'll try to answer very briefly, but unfortunately, because we've got multiple topics here, I won't be able to have a prolonged discussion on this. This has indeed been discussed in the past, and the reason is that we've got a layered security approach here, where first of all, the user agent obtains the user's actual consent to capture a specific surface that the user chooses. And at least in Chrome's implementation, and this is permitted by the spec, this is subject to a permissions policy. So given that the user first has to use an app, indicate trust in it, start a capture of a specific thing, and at least in Chrome's case, also say that they give the permission to zoom in, zoom out, and scroll, then we believe that this is safe enough.
And that's so my question is, that's an implicit grant, the zoom out and scroll, or they explicitly grant that as well?
Sorry?
Is that an implicit? Like today, is it implicit or is it explicit? Do they do a separate action that grants that permission to scroll and zoom?
So there is a permission prompt just like for your mic and video, okay? So there is an explicit permission in Chrome. The spec suggests that, but user agents are always at liberty to implement permission policies with or without a prompt, okay? So if user agents like, for example, Safari and...
let's just talk about what Chrome's going to do. No, I don't really care about anything else. Let's just talk about Chrome only. And I don't know what the spec is. I'm asking about how is the implementation of one browser going to be safe, and I don't care about the rest.
Absolutely. So first of all, Chrome already does this. This is an origin trial, and you're free to, you're welcome to look up the article about this and also play around with the demo. And yes, we have a permissions policy for that. That involves a prompt, an explicit Chrome level prompt.
Okay, thanks. That's all I need. That's great. I'll go read more about that. I think this is risky, but I will go learn more, and thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yuan, you were next.
Yes, so attribute is better, and nullable I think is easy to for developers to know whether there's a concept of zoom that is supported for that surface. Otherwise, if you put like 100, for instance, does it mean that there's a concept or there's not? So you need to figure out things So I think nullable is easier to understand. As of whether it should be in capture controller API or not, we should discuss it. I would mention the case that we discussed in the past of having one get display media stream call being able to capture multiple surfaces, in which case maybe the zoom level there would be a bit constrained for that extension. So that's something to consider.
It is true that if we include a lot of extensions in the future, things could break. Unfortunately, these future extensions are unlikely to happen in the near future, and we kind of need to design for the needs of web developers today.
Yeah,
but
and we need to future-proof our APIs, and there has been a desire for that particular extension, so we should take it into account as part of the design of its API.
I do not recall anybody, I recall very few web developers asking for that. And in fact, I think that when I tried to champion their case in this working group, you said that this was not an interesting use case and that they can just call get display media multiple times.
I'm not saying that whether it's interesting or not. I'm just saying that there's a potential extension and that we should take into account to design APIs so that we do not have to redesign them in, let's say, 2 years from now. So that's all. If we can do that very easily without changing this API, good for this API. If on the other case we have another proposal that is good with this future-proofness, then that's a bonus for this proposal.
I agree, that would be a bonus. Okay, thank you very much. So, Yanivar, just before that, so do I understand that everybody here agrees to making this an attribute that's nullable? Please jump the queue if you disagree, otherwise this is implicit agreement.
I would actually prefer not nullable because nullability requires extra code, but I can live with nullable.
Okay. Anybody else who could not live with nullable? Okay, so yeah, sorry.
Well, I kind of agree with Harald a little bit, but it seems like a detail we can work out.
So what should the minutes reflect? Should they reflect that we will compromise on a nullable attribute for now, and that we will revisit this if there is enough interest in making it non-nullable?
Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
Just to point out, I think web developers, at least for the foreseeable future, will have to test for support on this one anyway, so it can already be undefined.
Okay, Harald?
And just because it's my hand again, because it's a reply to UN, not to this point, but designing for extensibility is mostly a waste of time, because if we're not designing for explicit requirements for extensibility, then we're almost guaranteed to leave openings in the wrong places. And if we add more complexity in the name of designing for extensibility, we end up with complexity that nobody's using. It's a pain in the posterior. So most of the time, I'm in favor of designing for the current requirement set, not what we can imagine might be the future requirement set.
I second this notion. I've yet to encounter the case where the statement, we should also think about the future, was not relevant. This seems it's basically a truism. But okay, thank you very much for everybody. I'm moving on to the next topic. So as I've mentioned, because zoom level can change out of band, there's also an event handler that basically allows you to listen to that and make sure that web application UX is in sync with those changes. So in this case, we see on the left side, we've got Meet, and on the right side, we've got a shared tab that's captured by Meet. And you can see that by interacting with the user agent's own UX, sorry about some things appear to have moved a little bit out of sync here, but like if you look a little bit below the right side, you will see that there are zoom controls that basically allow you to change. So the 150 on the right matches the 150 on the left. I think this is pretty self-explanatory. Any questions or any comments here? No, thank you. Oh, sorry. Yes, Johan? You're muted.
Yep, sorry about that. Just the name. The name is too long, but we can backshade it later.
Yes, thank you so much. Moving on. So now we've got get supported zoom levels, and I know that you guys have got a couple of thoughts here. Keep them until I get to set zoom level, please. But just I want to introduce get supported zoom level. Zoom levels. It basically allows you to get an array or sequence or whatever of all of the supported zoom levels, and those can change depending on the tab or window. So, for example, I was thinking that if we cannot change the zoom level for window, it could just include the number 100 and nothing else. Whereas for tabs, we've got at least in Chrome, we've got the zoom levels that Chrome naturally cycles through. So I think it's 25, 50, 75, up to 500. Why not a range? Well, if we, because not all user agents necessarily support the ranges. If in the future we think that those are interesting, we can always change it to return ranges, and basically, a range consisting of a dot could just be a discrete value. But so far, this does not look interesting. And one of the interesting things here is that it allows you to create sliders and drop-down lists, right? Because you can be like, okay, here are all of the points along the slider, and you can just move and jump directly to that value. And that ties into set zoom level, which basically accepts only values from get supported zoom levels, right? And it changes the thing. It returns a promise because the promise basically is tied to the permission policy that I've just discussed earlier. And I just want to remind everybody that user agents, like Chrome, can prompt the user for permission, but user agents are also free to infer the permission from anything they want. They can use heuristics, they can blanket approve, blanket deny. These are all valid spec compliant options with permissions, and we leave that to other browsers to basically do as they believe is best for the user. So set zoom level is flexible because you can either have zoom in and zoom out buttons that basically cycle through single values, but you can also have a drop-down list, you can have sliders, or if you believe that two values are too close together, you can just skip one of them when you press the plus or minus zoom buttons. And it even allows you to do something nice, like say, hey, this presentation you're capturing right now seems to not be legible based on some automatic logic that we've run. So how about you click here one time and we'll just fix it for you, right? And that's better than saying, hey, how about you click here 7 times and then we're going to fix this for you, right? Okay. So the code that you would write with a drop-down list is very simple. You see here, you just say controller.setZoomLevel, parse int of the drop-down value. If you've got a button, that's a bit less wieldy, but it still works perfectly well. You say, hey, find the value in the sequence and then give me the next value in the sequence and set that. Admittedly, that's a little bit unwieldy. I'll discuss that in a second. So UN had a proposal to limit it to zoom in and zoom out functions. And I agree. I agree that it would have at least one pro, and that is less involved code would have to be written for the simple case. And also potentially a pro is a potential advantage is that malicious web applications cannot just set extreme values with a single transient activation. I do not consider this a strong advantage, but it is an advantage nonetheless. And some cons is the lost flexibility, the lost ability to determine legibility and just offer to fix that with a single click. And also it produces a slightly more verbose API surface that looks roughly like this, where you have one method for increase, one method for decrease, and web developers I've run this by said that they would at least need also a reset zoom level. So I leave it for you guys to decide which one is better. That's an acceptable compromise for me. Another possible compromise is to keep set zoom level, but also introduce these methods for convenience. So what do you guys think? Yes, Janivar.
Yeah, I think I'm supportive of a smaller API surface here, meaning I think I like Yuan's proposal here because functionality-wise, it limits. One of the risks would be that a malicious website would immediately zoom all the way out to capture way more than the user might expect. And this would seem to address that better. And the other part is that with this one, I think you also avoid get supported zoom levels, which would be, I'm not so worried about fingerprinting, but more that I think we see web developers, whenever we lean on web developers to deal with potential browser differences, that tends to go badly. There's always some developers that will then forego, if they're supposed to read out valid values and then only use those valid values, some web developers inevitably are going to hard code those values on the browser they tested with, and this would avoid that.
Okay, thank you for the feedback. Yuan?
Yeah, I would go with this API about the ability to tie one zoom increase or one zoom decrease per click or per user gesture. We could extend, like, it's in the spec, but we decide to allow it or not. So we could, we have some flexibility there if we wanted to allow some more, like 2 or so on. I would prefer still to keep it like very simple for now, so just strict, and then we can experiment with it. As of reset zoom level, can you remind me why we would need it in the first place? Like, why is it a P1?
Yes, I just want to say, respond to another comment before I answer the question, and that is, this does not actually get rid of the need for get supported zoom levels, because you still want to know whether increased zoom level, if the button should be enabled or disabled, because presumably once you hit the maximum, you want to kind of gray out the button that the user sees, right? So the web application might still want to know if they're at the maximum or minimum. So this does not actually reduce the need for, remove the need for get supported zoom levels. So provided that we still keep that, I'm okay with introducing increase, decrease, and reset, and removing set zoom level. And the reason for reset is that it's a request by web developers who believe that they would need to introduce UX that basically jumps back to the default zoom level with one click. That's what their product teams believe. I'm not here, I cannot comment on whether that's a smart idea for product-wise or not. It's a request.
Okay, well, maybe that's fine. I guess it's not too bad. With regard to get supported levels, I guess that it would become a range and not like an enumeration of values, right? Somehow.
No, that would not be a range. It would still be discrete values, because you wouldn't necessarily, like, user agents don't necessarily support intermediate values, right? Like if
you do not set the zoom level and you just increase, you just need to know the minimum value so that decrease will fail, or the maximum value where increase would succeed. So we could just provide these two values for now. I mean, and then we can discuss.
Okay, I'm okay with that. Harald?
Just saying that, like Elad, I think that set zoom level is actually more ergonomic.
Thank you for the support. Dom, you're next.
Yeah, if we go with increase, decrease, and wanted to get rid of get supported zoom levels, we could have the increase return false when you hit limit.
Yes, but that means that you first solicit the user to click that before you can actually gray it out, so that's a shame.
No, I mean, once you've increased to the max.
But what if you're already in the max? You could be at the max or the min to begin with.
Is that likely, though?
It is possible. I cannot comment on likely, but I don't see why we shouldn't handle it correctly.
Okay, that's fair.
Okay, so the proposal I'm making here is basically we change we remove set zoom level, we adopt all three methods as currently prescribed here, and we change get supported zoom levels to basically return two values, basically the min and the max. Does that make sense? Yes, Yanivar?
Yeah, I agree, except when you say literally what's on the screen, I think I'd still leave the option open to potentially move this API. If we put this on, for instance, a video element for scrolling, it seems to me that would make more sense, because the way you find it would be a capture control on the video element that's previewing a capture. And I don't, for instance, see why in the future we couldn't allow scrolling, panning, zooming, for instance, on cameras as well someday.
So the proposal right now is to take a PR, send it, and merge it. That makes this change. This does not preclude any future changes. So right now, there is a set zoom level on capture controller.
Yeah.
I'm proposing a compromise by which we remove it and introduce this instead, and future changes are not prohibited by this compromise.
Thanks, I'm happy.
Awesome. So, Dom, if you could be so kind, if the minutes could reflect this compromise. And thank you very much, Dom, for taking notes. And next slide for me. So, does anybody want to introduce any other point of discussion around this issue, zoom control? Yanivar, please note the particular issue of video element, because that's going to come up later. Okay, so nobody's proposing anything else. Thank you very much for your attention thus far. Next topic is scroll control. So in this particular section, like there will be one more section after this one, okay? In this section, I am not going to refer to anything around, okay, is it on HTML element or HTML video element or the capture controller? Because this is on capture controller, the first argument is going to be element. I request that we will look away from that fact and defer any discussion around that to the future. So at the moment, and that's a note, I basically foresaw this particular topic. But anyway, so the state of the art right now, in the spec, it says forward will, it accepts an HTML element. If you give null, it says, hey, stop forwarding. And if you give a specific element, then forwarding happens from that element to the captured surface. This was an evolution on an earlier API shape that was send will, that allowed the application to basically take any scroll and immediately, even without a scroll, to basically just produce will events on the captured surface. Now we're kind of guaranteeing that the user is actually interacting directly with the capturing application. Now, a couple of issues that were raised here. Number one, Yanivar mentioned that, hey, you can only forward from a single element if you shape the API like that. And I would say that no developer has ever requested to be able to forward from multiple elements at the same time. I have not been able to identify any real-life application that could potentially require more. A hypothetical scenario was described with an application that described by Yanivar, by the way, that was, he said, hey, what if an application wants to have multiple different preview tiles and each one has a different effect set on it, but they still want, the application still wants to forward gestures from all of them. And again, I'm not aware of any effects being applied on top of screen share. Just a second, I'll finish this particular bullet and then. So I'm not familiar with applications that apply effects on top of screen share content. And I am not even aware of anyone that has multiple ones of those. Yes, Yanivar.
Well, you said we weren't going to discuss moving it to video element, but one of the that would solve some of these problems. Right?
Yes, but I'm arguing this is not a problem. I'm arguing this is a hypothetical problem and not a realistic one at that. So
well, I think it would be better if the slides reflected discussion that's been happening on GitHub. I think examples have been presented there.
I don't think so. But please present the example.
Let me find them.
Is there an application that you're aware of that has multiple previews of the same captured surface?
So it's not the design guide should not be what existing applications are already doing. That's backwards, right? So it's easy to see that the developer could have multiple video elements representing the same capture, but with different video effects applied, for example, or different styling or cropped differently for different parts of the UI. And they want the user to be able to scroll from whichever preview the user interacts with. So having the API on the video element is cleaner. The video is already placed where the capture stream is displayed, less error prone.
I'm sorry.
Excuse me, I'll make 2 more points. Less error prone because it's harder to accidentally forward gestures to the wrong capture. It's more scalable because you can have multiple videos controlling the same forwarding of the same capture. And it's also idiomatic, and it's consistent with how other web APIs have augmented video functionality over time, like capture stream, and what's the other one? Yeah, I forget. The other one is escaping my mind right now.
Okay, so Jennifer, thank you again for interacting with this proposal and for giving your opinion. But respectfully, I don't think this is a realistic example. I agree that we should not be limited to what currently exists, but we have not heard from any web developers that they want this. We have not heard from any users that they want this. And I do not myself understand what effects applied on top of screen share mean, because this has never been tried, as far as I can tell. Now, my next point that you're actually leaning very well into is that nothing in life is free. So the proposal here to try to address multiple elements, unless we happen to get it by, kind of organically. But if we actually try to build it in, then there is increased cost to spec authors, there's increased cost to implementers. This produces more complexity that indirectly costs developers and users because there is more bugs, okay? And it also limits user agents from applying heuristics, which is something that you yourself have expressed an interest in. So given all of the costs, I don't really understand why we need to design for a future that I cannot even imagine. But that's my point. That's my point of view. But of course, you're free to disagree.
I mean,
Well,
I
I
think,
disagree.
I think I'm in the
Go
queue,
ahead.
and Dominic is in the queue as well.
Yes.
So if I can jump in.
Yes, please.
So with regard to the cost, increased cost to spec offers, well, we have partial interfaces. So you can place it wherever you want in terms of DOM API, and you can place it wherever you want in terms of specs. So I don't see that. I implemented some of these APIs with partial interfaces. The increased cost is like, honestly, it's 2 or 3 lines. So I don't really understand where is the cost there for implementers. And for WPT, you can place the test wherever you want as well. Usually you follow the spec, so it seems fine as well. So I would really look at web developers there and future-proofness as well. This should be really the 2 major points, I think, because otherwise they are pretty similar.
I'm sorry, but this is not exactly what I said. My problem was not in finding where to place it spec-wise. I'm saying the spec is going to be more verbose, would have to look at more edge cases, handle them more carefully, and that's the cost. And for implementers, it could be that some browsers are written very well and can be very easily extended, but at least in Chrome, this is non-trivial to support, requires a lot of user tests, and this would all be absolutely fine if there was any web developer request for it. The problem is that these costs, regardless of whether high or low, are to absolutely no benefit. And that's my claim. Dominic, you're next on the queue.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of use cases, like I can imagine that it's not so much in the context of screen sharing, but you could, I mean, without too much of a stretch, I think imagine an application where you want to apply effects to, say, a local window to see whether dark mode works better, or if you're designing, being able to apply video effects on what you're designing to get a sense of the resulting look. Like that doesn't feel out of...
Yes, but forwarding scrolls does not currently work for Windows, and it is likely that it will never work for Windows because the operating systems that are on the market right now don't generally permit that.
Right. I meant applying this to something you do in your browser. Like you can do pretty much, I mean, so many things in your browser. You could be doing your design work in a browser. So, I mean, I hear you that there isn't someone on the market demanding it now, but in terms of a category of use cases that could benefit from it, I mean, like it doesn't feel super high-level priority support, but it doesn't feel science fiction either. Like I can see this. It's more likely to emerge as well if the API shape is congruent with it than if we pretend it doesn't exist. So again, I guess I'm pushing back a little on the fact that there is no imaginable use cases. I can fairly easily in some.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the feedback, although I don't agree with it. You know, some of these things are subjective. Yanivar?
Well, I would think objectively, it's better to have it on the video element for the points that I mentioned, because you have a one-to-many relationship here. This is a user feature. This is a user feature that allows only the user of the browser to add some controls, and those controls are specifically logically tied to playback of that preview. It doesn't work and otherwise. Therefore, it's much more logical, I think, to put it on the video element. Because
thank you very much. I would just like to repeat my note of this section focusing on topics other than HTML element, HTML video element, capture controller, and the point of exposure. We'll have plenty of time to discuss this particular issue in the next section.
Okay, thank you. But then I would just say that it specifically also addresses the problem of you presented of when you call forward capture again, you can't add a second video element, but it replaces the existing forwarding to the previous video element, which I think is confusing.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm moving to the next topic. Other gestures, right? So Yuan, you've mentioned that, and I think Jennifer too, at the moment, forwarding wheel events is interesting and safe. We've got web applications that are using this in Origin trial, and I think I understand from this discussion that we've got consensus that it's interesting and that we want to solve this problem. Now, the question was raised about other gestures. Sorry for writing events here, I meant gestures. So first of all, for clicks, I think that we all agree that although this would have been very interesting, unfortunately, it's not safe, it's out of scope, and it's likely to stay out of scope. But pinch, for example, might be interesting. And I would argue that this could be left for future extension. Right now, we don't have any web developers that ask for this, but I can imagine some might. And definitely API shapes that are more extensible to this possibility are better than ones that are not. Yes, Yanivar?
Well, I also, as far as the spec goes, I don't think we have any deadlines. So I think we should make sure that we have a path and a direction that can address these things that we can foresee as well. So for pinch, for instance, you could imagine zooming on a tablet. The one that's not mentioned here, I think, is touch events, because I think right now all the APIs have talked about wheel events, which works great on desktop. But there might be tablets, I don't know, maybe Windows tablets. Right now, I know there's a lot of limitations there's not a lot of screen capture on Get Display Media on popular mobile devices, but there might be some on the Windows tablet, for instance.
Okay,
we need to anticipate screen capture on these devices.
Absolutely, and the next few slides are going to discuss extensibility, and you will see that we will be able to extend this to pinch if we decide in the future. And although the spec does not have a deadline, this presentation does, so I'm going to move forward now.
I just meant pinch is not, I'm talking about scrolling using touch events.
Beg pardon?
I'm talking about scrolling using touch events, which is, I think pinch is more of a two-finger gesture, right, to zoom.
I only named pinch as one example. Of course, if you've got any other kind of pointer event that you think needs to be one of the gestures, then we can discuss this, and this can be presented in one of the upcoming interims. And I would be very happy to attend your presentation on the topic.
All right.
So I would like to present 4 different possibilities for reshaping the API to foresee future extensions. Spoiler alert, my favorite is number 3, and I consider number 4 to also be acceptable. So option number 1, we could just keep forward wheel, right? In the future, if we want to have forward pinch, we can do that. We want to have a forward hypothetical gesture, we can have that. We have a single one for each one of those. There are some cons, there are some pros. Let me start with the pros. Pro, it's clear and simple, right? You see the method, you know exactly what it does. Gestures could be multiple different gestures. Forward wheel, relatively simple. Forward pinch, even simpler. Second thing is that if we somebody authors code today, it does one thing. In the future, gestures suddenly could mean something else, but forward wheel will always mean wheel. Forward pinch will always mean pinch. So this is great. Unfortunately, if we've got 10 different gestures, suddenly it becomes very awkward to have to call all of them, right? Admittedly. So option number 2 is to say, hey, just forward all of the gestures, right? All or none. Arguably future-proof, because hey, whatever gestures we add, it automatically supports those. But I disagree. I think that it's actually a burden, because it means that somebody writing code today doesn't know what it's going to do tomorrow. And while some applications might be happy to get the extra functionality without doing anything, others might not like that so much. Okay. And another thing, okay, the other points don't really matter, and we're pressed for time. Option number 3, my favorite, basically says like, hey, just make it so that it's forward gestures. It accepts a dictionary, and the dictionary says exactly which gestures are included. And so web developers that care about which ones these are can just turn them on and off as they see fit. If we think that, then we can discuss whether the default needs to be false or true. I would argue for false. True is also a possibility. We've got flexibility here, okay? This is relatively simple, and it would fully solve the issue of future extensibility. Another option here is to say, okay, it's not just the dictionary. You can also explicitly say blanket off, blanket false, right? So it's basically Boolean or dictionary. So developers that want to forward all gestures just pass through, and they know that whatever comes out in the future is covered, and then we can have the dictionary with everything set to default false. Sorry that the slide does not reflect that. So basically, the dictionary has all future things default false. If you want to enable everything, you say true. If you want to mix and match, you pass in the dictionary with whatever you want today, and you extend that in the future. Yes, Yuan.
So forward wheel with false is very clear. Forward wheel with true would mean that we would
that would be forward gestures.
Yeah, forward gestures. Yeah, I mean, forward gestures false is pretty clear. I'm less clear about forward gestures true, meaning that is it the case that all the fields would be true basically, or is it the case that all the fields would have their default value, which would be so what is?
Ideally, the answer would be yes and yes, because I've made a mistake here on the slide. Actually, the dictionary for option number 4 should have default everything to false. Okay, so then if you pass true, it means everything on. If you pass false, everything off. And if you pass the dictionary, only the things that you explicitly turn on. Excellent, thank you, Dom. Only the things that you explicitly turn on will be turned on. So I think option number 4 is actually my favorite now that you mentioned that. Yes.
So
Yannick, sorry, Yuan?
Yeah, another thing is that with option 3, it was not very clear how you would stop forwarding. You would have to say forward gesture with null, something like provide a nullable dictionary or something like that, and that would be quite complex. So
one option
that's why I would tend to go with option 4, I think, as well.
Okay, so we've got 2 people supporting option 4. Next on the queue is Harald.
Yeah, just what I don't like about the option that has defaults is that it brings things into scope that have not been evaluated for whether they're safe or not. I think option 1 is simple. You turn forwarding of a single thing on, and if a new one is defined, you add one. The alternative is that you have a list of gestures that you can turn on, but you have to be explicit about it. I don't like the thought that some future gesture that could possibly be a security implication could be turned on by default.
I think the principle here is that we would start with a Boolean, and if we ever want to support like multiple things, then if we want fine-grained control with more like will and so on, then we would add the dictionary. But initially, I would say option 4 start with a Boolean and may extend in the future with dictionary. No, that was not the case.
I'm sorry, Evan. The idea is this. You need the dictionary now because you want web developers to be able to write future-proof code. So if a developer today knows that they only want will and they don't foresee wanting anything in the future, they need to write code that today that they can go on vacation and it will still accomplish exactly that when they return 1 year in the future.
So what I like to have is like then a kind of scroll gesture and not will. Because I don't think when you're using a surface and you're doing that, you're doing a scroll, and that's the intent. And with your will, you're also doing scroll. So whatever the actual kind of scroll that the user agent is deeming appropriate, I think it's that we should try to define as a concept.
I'm sorry, there is a misunderstanding here. What the user agent deems appropriate is what the user agent thinks could be forwarded, but different applications might only care about specific gestures because they might want to consume the other gestures in some other way. So for example, you can imagine that pinch and like pinch zoom in Meet might mean, hey, I want to only for myself increase the size of this tile and I want to rearrange it and move it around and resize it, but I still want the captured surface to retain its current zoom level. That's completely different, and I don't want to move anything there. And that's something that the web application needs to be able to do. It needs to be able to pick and choose what's forwarded and what's consumed locally and what's ignored.
I totally agree with pinch and scroll being 2 different things. I'm not sure I agree that will versus scrolling with the finger is a different thing. And that's what I'm discussing here. But I see others in the queue. So.
By the way, sorry, in 3 minutes, I'm going to ask you guys to stop and I'll move to the next topic.
So the option 3, is it? The dictionary. Can you go back to that one? This is not going to work because there's a design principle that it's a bad idea for dictionaries to default to true for Boolean attributes.
Yes, Dom has provided that in the comments and I agree. Sorry, my mistake.
So I would actually go for the simpler here, where I think also what I don't like is that if you go to option 1, there was a true false to turn this feature on and off entirely. At least that's in the spec right now. The first argument is true or false. It's a Boolean.
No, it's element, and it's the only argument right now.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I'm thinking of a different proposal that I made. So I like the idea of maybe adding an option subject in the future, but it doesn't seem like we need to discuss the details of that option subject right now.
So is there any, sorry, Guido, you're on the queue. And muted.
Yes, I wanted to point out that, if we go with the 3, everything has to be false by default, so that you pass it so that you can disable it by default, because otherwise you'll have the problem of future code doing something different, or of current code doing something different in the future. And in particular, in option 4, if true means everything set to true, then that opens the possibility of it's basically option 2. So it's like you write code saying true today, and it does something today, and then tomorrow when we add other gestures, then it starts forwarding gestures that were not being forwarded today. So it would have the same. So number 4 looks very similar to number 2. So I guess in my opinion, the only valid ones are 1 and 3. And I don't have a strong opinion over 1 and 3, except that in number 3, they need to be all by default false, so that you have to specify explicitly which ones you want to enable, so that the code is doing the same thing in the future.
Yes, so the idea here was basically that will default to true because that's the thing that we ship with, but basically everything else will default to false. But that does not seem great, I agree. The reason that I wanted to go with that was basically that Yanivar didn't like the fact that if you call forward gestures and you don't actually add the dictionary, then it looks like it should turn on all gestures, but then it does something else. Apologies, I will not take more comments because otherwise I won't have time to go to the next section. I'll only ask one question. Does it look like we could compromise on one of these, or do we have no path to a compromise here? Is anybody willing to take number 3 or 4? Let's say, I think 4, although suboptimal, because it allows it allows the web developer to shoot themselves in the foot by providing true. Cautious web developers would still be able to pick and choose, right? Provided that the dictionary defaults to false. So I propose, as a quick compromise, that we go with number 4. What do you guys say, yes or no?
I'd like to continue discussing the principle of focusing on pinch and scroll instead of wheel or touch.
I don't understand what that means, because we know that we want at least wheel. This does not preclude anything else. It just says we start with wheel and we can immediately go with go along with pinch and everything else in the future. Like this, these are not mutually exclusive.
I think there's a miscommunication here. If you're going to zoom on a tablet, you don't get wheel events, you get touch events.
Yes,
So
and that will be. And in order to support that, we will also add the touch events as the next booleans in the dictionary. The dictionary was there to allow you to add more values in the future.
But
I'm not
I
sure
think
this
it's
is
a question of semantics, Elad.
Sorry?
Touch events it's a question of semantics. Touch events are generic. They can be used to tap, which is the equivalent of click, but they can be used for scrolling. And so if you focus gestures on the basically hardware capabilities rather than the intended user semantics, then you're not going to be transmitting the right intent. And so it's going to be hard for developers to say, oh, yes, I want touch events, but only when they are used for scrolling, not when they are used for clicking on a link.
But the user agent can do that. The user agent can make sure that it only transmits those gestures that are non-click.
But then it's a question of formulating this as the right semantics that the user agent exposes, basically.
And is that really related to renaming the method into forward gestures and making it accept a Boolean or dictionary?
No, I think it's somewhat orthogonal, but the list of items on the dictionary will be very different. So I guess is the point.
For instance, it would be forward scrolling gestures or the dictionary forward gesture. It would not be wheel. It would be scroll equal to true or something.
Okay, so one more call for a compromise here. I suggest that we go with number 4, rename wheel to scroll, and default the dictionary value to false. Do you guys agree or disagree?
I would like to disagree, unfortunately, because I think that the coupling between a particular input method and the reaction of the application is application specific, not UA specific. As in, And dragging the scroll wheel on the web today has very different effects depending on the web page you're on. Letting the application capture the wheel is very different from assuming that scrolling the wheel means that the user wants a certain function. So I would rather capture the wheel and leave the translation between the user action and the intended purpose be done by the application.
Thank you for that, Harald. I appear to have misunderstood some of what previous people said. My intention in offering this compromise was that if you capture Google Maps, that would still work, where scrolling is not actually scrolling anything, it moves the map around, etc. So definitely if changing from wheel to scroll would break that, that's not something I was gonna suggest as a compromise. Guys, I'm sorry, you're on the queue, but I only have 5 minutes, so unless the chairs think that I could take an extra 5 minutes later, I'll have to move to the next topic. Chairs, do you think we've got enough time this time?
I'm happy to yield some of my time.
Thank you so much. In that case, Guido is next on the queue, but then it's you.
No, you can skip. I already said that I don't like. I only like 1 and 3, but yeah. And that probably since this discussion, there are a lot of disagreements here. Probably the conclusion is that there is no compromise yet, and we need to keep discussing it in GitHub, I think.
So my comment is just that I like someone said that they don't like gestures to be forwarded that they can anticipate in the future. I actually think that's a good thing. If you think of these as, we call it forward gestures, but if we were to move this to the video element, we might even call this something like capture control, captured surface control, or control captured surface as a way to. So I like the idea of having an options object. I do like that for future extension. But the idea that would be that the user agent can forward wheel events or touch events if it's on the necessary platform. Applications can use prevent default if they want to intercept and do something else with that touch event, for instance, to draw on an overlay. So I think that could work.
I don't understand how the application can prevent default, because basically this goes to the video element that is consumed by it, but this maybe that's out of scope for now. Basically, it looks like we've got no consensus to make changes to the spec, and it will stay forward wheel for now until we find some kind of compromise.
Can I ask a question about Chrome's implementation? Does the web application have a way to intercept the event in this case?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
But I'm not 100% sure. I might be making a mistake here. If you find an issue, then we can always fix it later.
Elad, sorry for continuing the discussion. Is there an issue open already on the repo on this?
There are multiple issues, and some of them bled into each other. So if you've got feedback and you don't find an issue that fits this exactly, please open one. Or do you mean for in order to put that in the minutes?
Both, but I guess I won't put anything.
Okay, I'll try to look up if there is anything exactly for this and contact you after the meeting.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Okay, so thank you very much, and thank you, Yennefer, for yielding some of your time. How much do you think you could give me? Just so I try to kind of aim for that.
Well, I'm happy to. I think this is an important topic that we should finish. So I'm happy to yield the time that we need.
Awesome. So do I understand that I've got until and 40, right?
Well, let's see how it goes.
Sure. All right. So next topic, and the last one that I've got for today is basically a consideration of a proposal to limit the API to only work with video elements. And this proposal was made, if I'm not mistaken, by Anivar, and UN has also expressed some interest in it. So my assertion is going to be that this is actually at odds with a core use case for the API, which is annotations. So if we think about Meet, that has already participated in the Chrome origin trial and is using this API and is relatively satisfied with it, they sometimes want to, their users sometimes scroll the content, and sometimes they annotate over it, and sometimes they do both. And they definitely don't want to have to switch between two different modes. They want the user to just do whatever they want at any given time. So scrolling, is associated with, according to this proposal, it would be associated with the video. Sorry, I'll get back to that in a second. So let's just talk for a second about annotations. Annotations can be implemented in multiple different ways. What you can have is, one thing is you can have a video element in the background, and on top of it, a partially transparent canvas element on which you draw the annotations. That's one possibility. Another possibility that's not listed in the slide is that you could use breakout box to actually annotate directly on the frames. It's not a very likely possibility because you would have to do it for every single frame, but theoretically it is possible. Another option is that you can have a canvas on which you actually put individual frames and you also annotate directly, so you've got a single element. And you could even have multiple different elements for every single annotation, right? So you could have, every time there is a sticky note, you've got one element for that. Every time there is a curve, there could be an element for that text box element, and all of those could be arranged on top of the video element. That's reasonable. That's a possible way of implementing it. With the last one that I mentioned, you would maybe have a factory method that kind of says like, hey, I need this type of annotation, and then you get the element and you put it somewhere on your viewport. So no matter how you're going to implement annotations, it always consists of putting pixels that occlude partially the video element that displays what you're actually capturing. So that's actually by design, right? The user never sees a completely unobstructed view of whatever they're capturing. And another thing that we kind of need to note is that the annotations themselves are typically driven by the user clicking on the place where they want the annotation to be placed, right? They either click, drag, and let go of something to draw a curve, or maybe they click to initiate a sticky note, put in some text, and then maybe even drag that sticky note. So we always have this tension between the user needs to scroll the content, but the user also needs to annotate over. So let's imagine, just to simplify, we'll focus on the case where you've got a video element in the background and you've got an annotations element in the foreground, although we remember that there might be multiple different elements, but assume there is a single one and that both of them are actually the same size, right? And they're overlaid perfectly on top of each other. So what happens if we actually limit scrolling to HTML video elements? How do we do that without breaking annotations? So scroll events need to go to the back, clicks need to be consumed in the front. Aha, maybe not, right? What if we use pointer events none? Everything, all of the pointer events go to the video element, and then the video element just calls the draw me one, draw curve, draw text box. All of those functions are just, instead of being an event handler on the canvas, they're an event handler on the video. Theoretically, that would work. The problem is that it only works for simple applications that kind of do everything in one place. But it's much more likely for an application to actually use some kind of library for the annotations. That's actually what they do in Meet's case, right? And once you have, once you've got an application like that that uses library, you cannot directly reach into the event handler and take it and say like, no, instead of you calling this function, this element is going to call that function. You don't know which functions are registered as event handlers and on which element. You just lose that knowledge. So basically, at least unless I'm missing something, in which case please point it out and I would love to consider it. Annotations and limiting to video elements are at odds with one another. And one second, just a second. So one way to maybe work around this is if your library and the annotations are kind of containerized, right, and they're all held within one element, what you could do is you take the events from the background element, from video, and if they're not scroll events that you want to forward, if they're clicks, for example, you can clone them and redispatch them on the canvas element. Except that, as far as I can tell, this would not work, because the moment you say pointer events none, that means that those event handlers are not actually invoked. And at least my empirical testing, modulo any mistakes I might have made, yielded this result, that it just doesn't work. And even if it did work, there are some downsides. One, you're gonna, by cloning an event and trying to redispatch it, you lose the is trusted bit, which could break things. And also that's kind of prohibitively difficult if it's not actually containerized, right? If you've got annotations as multiple different elements swimming around your viewport, instantiated by the library, that's going to be prohibitively difficult to actually try to dispatch them on different events. Different elements. So yes, Yanivar.
Yes, thank you for hold on one second. Sorry, I had to cough there. So thank you for explaining the setup here. And I think it's true that any overlay like this, you mentioned multiple elements, but you can easily imagine a container, right, that contains all those elements. That is the overlay. So let's go with that. There's a single, let's call that a single overlay for now, just to simplify discussion. I think such an overlay would already have to do either use a pointer event none, but then it can't be interactive. So any kind of interactive overlay would already could not use pointer event none, right? But it would already need special code to go through the events and forward some of them to the underlying video element, for instance, if we wanted to do an overlay. But that doesn't work because that would lose the trusted property in our case. So I think you're shaking your head.
Yes, I'm sorry. I don't really understand, because in the setup we have here, you never actually want to forward anything to the video element, right? Like not a single thing is actually handled by the video element. In Mit's example, which is just an example, but a realistic one, nothing goes to the video element. Everything is handled by containers that are overlaid on top of the video element.
Sure. I was explaining the issue with limiting it to video elements. So imagine we have forward gestures on the video element. Works great until you put an overlay on top of it. And I'm just explaining the problem here is that if the annotations element that's on top intercepts these events and then means to make decisions like, well, this is a draw event, so I'm going to prevent default and do something, my own thing with that. But this is a scroll event. I'm going to forward that to the video element. It has to create a new synthetic event. And the user agent would then say, well, this is not a trusted event, so that doesn't work.
I'm sorry, that's the opposite, actually. That's
yes,
the opposite direction.
I'm setting up what you presented on GitHub, which is what I think the Chrome team, you got feedback that there's a possibility to do that the other way around, where you do send the trusted event all the way to the video element using CSS or something. And then you could do like pointer event none. So it's news to me that pointer event none prevents you from dispatching events back to the annotations overlay. So I would have to go check that.
So there are two directions, and we seem to be talking about different ones. So let me introduce both, so that we cover both. One option is.
Sorry, what I meant with the initial setup was to explain that that's the same amount of effort that a library would have to do. They already have to do this. Having an overlay that's interactive is a challenge already. So,
no, I'm sorry. I think that you've misunderstood me. Sorry for interrupting you, but I just want to explain what I was really saying. The challenge is not for the library. The challenge is for the user of the library. Because in this setup, you've got a video element that does not consume any events, right? That's how we start. On top of it, you've got something that will also consume the events. That's a library. And maybe it's inside of a div that consumes the scroll events, right? And that's the case. We basically have a div, there's a video at the back, there's a canvas on top, the div consumes absolutely everything, okay? And that works right now. You suggest that we should only make the scrolls should only have an effect if they go over the video, because that's what's connected to forwarding. And then you can go in either direction. You can either say that, hey, you somehow let the scroll events go all the way to the video while everything else gets handled before, or you can say it's the other direction. Everything goes all the way to the video element, but then the video element kind of sends some of these things back to the foreground.
Yes, I think we discussed multiple approaches for this on GitHub. If you're saying that, I thought we had some agreement. If you're saying that this doesn't work because of libraries, I would say I would like to know more about those libraries. Do they rely on trusted events? If not, it seems like something libraries would evolve to support.
Let me just look here. Yes. So first of all, I'm saying that by design, they cannot really support this, okay? Because it's not just the issue of trusted events, it's that you cannot, you're kind of forcing the application to take the event, to clone it, to redispatch it to the library, and then to somehow magically avoid the fact that currently by setting pointer events none, you basically tell the user agent, this container does not actually handle events. So don't bother sending those events, right? So this is at odds, these two things.
Well, there's new information here that I haven't been able to sufficiently prepare for. So I think we have to continue discussion then.
Great. Before I continue, does anybody else have anything they want to say? No. Okay. So consideration of feedback. So you mentioned, Yanivor, that we should consider letting user agents limit forwarding to when the capture is visibly plain, so users see that what they're interacting with. Yes. Sorry, Yanivor?
Sorry, that screenshot is an older API, right? Like we were talking about forward gestures with a Boolean attribute.
I think you're quoting either your own message here or UN, and you say you would want it to look like that. Now, forget about the particular...
This is dated October 21st, so this is pretty old, right?
Yes, I'm not referring to the everything about this screenshot, right? Not the enable gestures forwarding Boolean. I'm just saying the general premise that you want, and I'll read that again. We should consider letting user agents limit forwarding to when the capture is visibly plain, so users can see what they're interacting with. That's the part I'm kind of referring to. Is that okay? Is that still a valid characterization of your position?
It's not all of it, but go ahead.
Awesome. Obviously, this is only one small piece of feedback, but yeah. So I want to consider this feedback from a couple of angles. So first of all, I want to mention that even with the current API shape, user agents are still free to employ any heuristics of their choosing, with or without limiting to video elements. You can make sure that there is a video element that's plain unmodified, fully visible, unobstructed, recent frames from the captured surface. And this is something that you can do with the current API shape. That's not something that we're preventing anybody. Now, the question is, will limiting the API to only work with video elements increase the user agent's ability to ensure that, and I repeat, users see what they're interacting with? And what I want to claim is that you can't actually use that, okay? This change does not increase your ability of the user agent's ability to do that unless you break annotations, because you actually need to have multiple restrictions, some of which are problematic and some are not. One, you need some minimum size to the video element, right? You don't want the user to kind of accidentally scroll over something that they can barely make out, and that turns out to scroll something. So minimum element size, that's okay, not a problem. Second is it can't be moved directly under the user's cursor at just the right moment, right? So you kind of need to make sure that it stayed in a stable location for a while, not a problem. you need to make sure that the user actually sees that, right? Because it could be completely transparent. So again, not a problem. You need to make sure that the video element is displaying a recent, unmodified frame, so no cropping, no breakout box, etc. So recent, unmodified frame from the relevant captured surface. I would argue even that is okay. But the problem is that you also need to make sure that nothing is drawing on top of the video element, because otherwise everything else just goes out the window, right? All of the other restrictions amount to nothing if there's something on top. Yes, Yanivar.
Well, thank you for outlining these. I think that's very helpful. On the last one, nothing drawn over the video element. I think the goal here is to put user agents in a better position to implement heuristics to distinguish legitimate use from malicious use. So, I think for this one, I think in Chrome's annotation system, it usually starts out transparent, right?
Meets.
Sorry, Meet. So Meet, the overlay here is the primary function is to show what's being captured, and you can annotate above it. That's the use case. And that use case seems distinguishable from a malicious application that covers up most of it in order to try to induce overscroll. So I don't think that's a problem. It might be a tricky heuristic to get, but that's the problem is not to standardize these heuristics, but provide an API that puts the user agents in the best position to implement those. And putting it on the video element increases, has to limit functionality, right, to the video element to ensure that. And that's a better fit because user agents then have a place to start from. They can check whether the capture is actually playing in the video element right now and whether it's occluded within an amount that the user agent considers troublesome.
How is that not possible without limiting to video element? Why can you not employ all of these heuristics already?
You can, but there's more of a mismatch between what web developers would expect as functionality from if you can just forward, if the API is a low-level forward wheel events from any div, it's not clear to web developers what the limitations might be in certain browsers.
I've got a couple of answers, but I suspect that you guys want to hear other people's voices too. Guido was there on the queue before Tim, and I think that the system mistakenly thought that he spoke. So Guido, do you want to say anything?
No, I'll let Tim speak.
Okay, Tim?
So I think understanding what web developers are going to guess how this is going to behave is frankly terrifying. Like the level of heuristics that we're talking about is going to be like the amount of surprise is going to be huge. Like things are going to work and not work randomly. So like this whole API is a massive challenge, I think, for developer understanding. And I don't think that moving it to the video element makes any difference. I think it's clearer to make it on any div and then put a bunch of warnings which say, you have to have a semi-transparent div and it has to have a video element behind it and whatever. But whatever it is, we need the rules to be understood because it's going to be fantastically difficult to test this, like almost impossible. Like if somebody, so the classic example here is if somebody scribbles over 3/4 of the screen, does it suddenly stop working? Like this is going to be really, really hard to test.
I agree completely, which is why we don't actually have a plan to implement such restrictions. But of course, we don't want to prevent Mozilla from doing that if they believe that this serves their users better, although I don't think that it does. Next on the queue is Yanivar.
Yes, I would counter that, Tim, by saying that, of course, I think it would be simpler to have it on the video element because you're turning on a feature of that video element, which is that when you interact with that video element by doing some gestures like scrolling gestures, you can actually scroll what's being presented. That's a very useful and understandable area. And it's clear to web developers that if you don't play back that, if you pause the playback, then it would stop working. How would you know that if you're using some capture control or forward event method? You wouldn't. It wouldn't be intuitive. And also, as far as what user agents might do to mitigate bad behavior mitigations, browsers do click-jacking mitigations all the time. It's hyper complex, but we don't burden the web developer with those complexities. In fact, if Mozilla wants to add this, it's on us to not break your use case. So we're not asking you to handle this complexity. So I think that's backwards.
Guido?
My point is, the point I would like to express is that, yeah, the UA is perfectly positioned to know if a capture is tied to a video element, even if the API is not in the video element. So like all the restrictions you want to add, because it's intuitive. Yeah, I would agree that it's more intuitive that if you want to do something with the association of the capture and the video element to put the API in the video element. But the problem is that then you make impossible a core use case. So you gained a very small advantage in like readability of the API, but you break the use case. So you have an API that's useless. So if you don't restrict the element at the API level, but keep the restrictions associated to the video element, because the UA knows if the capture is being played on a video element and on the right video element, I don't see why any of these restrictions wouldn't work. I don't see a problem with applying all the restrictions that we want associated with a video element, but allowing the forward events to be an element different than the video element, as long as all the restrictions that apply to the video element that's playing the capture apply. And then you solve the problem, the library problem for the annotations use case.
So to respond to that, I think that ideally, I'm not, I think I would prefer slides that. Go ahead.
Sorry, Yaniva, I think I was on the queue before you.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm hearing, the security restrictions are not linked to the API surface here, whether it's as a video element or not. So I think that's really something we can discuss separately. I'm also hearing, and at least I agree, that there is a slight advantage from an ergonomic perspective, to have it on the video element. Conversely, if indeed we confirm that it's impossible or extremely expensive to support the annotation use case with the video element, I think that's a very strong argument that this may not be the right surface. And I think I'm hearing part of the question is indeed whether pointer events none kills event handlings completely, which MDM kind of suggests it might. And if so, yeah, that feels like a very problematic situation. But otherwise, I would say if we find a workaround, a realistic workaround, like the video element feels intuitively a bit better.
So Dom, I'm not jumping the queue, I'm just asking for clarification. You said that you're hearing that it's more ergonomic to have it on video element. Could you please explain from whom did you hear that?
Well, Yanivar, and I thought Guido said the same, that it was a bit clearer in terms of developer expectations.
So since this is actually a proposal of mine, I actually would love to present slides that present the benefits a little more. Since I'm the champion of this, I don't believe that my benefits necessarily are reflected by these slides. I can repeat some of the points I made earlier. That I think video element is cleaner because the video is already placed where the capture stream is displayed. And when you talk about, Guido is right, we could implement mitigations in other places, but it comes down to if the web developer expectations are too far removed from, are too flexible, frankly, then that becomes harder for a browser to implement. And the other part is it's less error prone because it's harder to accidentally forward gestures to the wrong capture. And that is not addressed in the existing API.
I'm sorry,
As
that
much
is
as-
that is reflected by it being exposed on controller, which is uniquely associated one-to-one with a live capture.
Well, you can have two capture controls. If you're capturing two things, you can forward the events to the wrong capture.
That is the only option, yes, but it is relatively rare for you to be capturing two different things and for your application to actually not know which is which.
Well, I'm saying it might be rare, but it's something browsers would have to contend with that kind of API surface, and makes it harder to implement mitigations, click jacking mitigations. Right.
My vocabulary failed me
And
when
the
I used
third
the word
point-
rare. I think it's unheard of.
Well, it'd be good if I had slides that reflected my points, but the third point is that it's also more scalable. It's straightforward support for multiple videos, each controlling its own forwarding. And I think that was also discussed, as well as more idiomatic. This is consistent with how other APIs have been extended that involves media elements for capture stream, for example.
By the way, I didn't include those slides, but I just want to mention that web developers have also said that the minimum would be video or canvas, even if they theoretically could support this, because a lot of there's often a requirement, or not a requirement, but a discussion around potentially moving from video elements to canvas elements. And once you reach that, once you say that you want it to be a canvas element, I really don't understand what you've gained here. And
Well,
for
I
us,
think-
that's a hard blocker.
Well, to use your point to respond to your question to me there, to use your point that we don't know of any web developers right now who are needing that. So that's something we could add over time. There's also a precedent for capture stream, for example, which is both on the media element and on canvas. So it is possible to extend that method to canvas in the future if we want to do that. And that would still put the user agents, that would still be a user agent centric API that makes it easier for user agents to mitigate, because there are expectations in place that could also be standardized to some extent if we go that route. That, for instance, a video has to be playing, stuff like that. For canvas, it gets a little trickier. We could also add mitigations that detect whether video frames have been pasted to the canvas that might represent the playback of the capture. Now, these complexities are up to user agents again to handle, and this is not meant for web developers to be inconvenienced by. But
Yes,
it's just about setting up an API that makes it easier because the expectations are more contained to legitimate use cases.
Okay, and I still don't understand exactly at what point you're going to consider too many annotations to be on there, and why you're going to break it at that point. And the Steam team mentioned, like, it's not clear to me how many pixels are too many, and how web developers are going to foresee it, and how they're going to deal with the fact that, you know, suddenly it stops scrolling.
Well, maybe the malicious use case is not one where the website works really well for several minutes, and it, you know, if a annotation page starts, if it's the user that's annotating, right? So it's not really clear why that would be a problem for legitimate applications.
You have no way of knowing that the user was annotating, because you have no way of knowing that the pixels that are overlaid on top of the video were truly in response to the transient activations you got, because you can count how many transient activations there were, but you cannot correspond it actually to the number of pixels drawn over time over the video.
I think what user agents, you know, we're talking about mitigations here. That's a long rabbit hole, but I would shorten that to say that I think the malicious use case we're worried about are much more immediate, where as soon as you start a capture, it either zooms all the way out or scrolls all the way down to capture as much as possible and get out of there. I think those are the malicious websites we're worried about. Not, it wouldn't come close probably to interfere with an annotation use case.
Yep. So I'm the Q. I would like to put out that I'm looking forward to your presentation, or where you clarify your position there. What I want to point out is that supporting annotations and solving the library problem, when you do the annotations with a complex library, that's like a hard requirement. So as long as the proposals supports that use case, then we're good. What we're gonna do is say, okay, we're not going to support the core use case because it looks better to put the API in the video element, and it supports a feature that is not a core use case or part of the minimum viable product, which is like supporting multiple video elements at the same time. What I say is that that problem can be solved because the user agent knows if a capture is associated to a video element, and then everything you want to do with the association of the capture with the video element is doable without restricting the forwarding to the video element. So all the restrictions and all the techniques you want to apply to make sure that only the honest use case works and the malicious use case doesn't work, that can be done without restricting to video element. But yeah, if you can achieve that by putting the API, by restricting to video element, if you can support the core use case, then yeah, that would be good. But it really does need to support that, because the annotations is like a core requirement.
Well, to respond to that quickly, I think I agree that is something that seems worth solving, and this is new information in this meeting, so I would love time to please present that in GitHub so it can be discussed, maybe it's a new issue or an existing issue. And we did discuss some other techniques. This was a problem only with a specific technique, which we called backwarding, forwarding back to the overlay, and there might be other ways to solve that. But more information about the restrictions of the library on GitHub would be useful. Thanks.
They've already been posted. Looking forward to reading it and responding to it.
All right, thanks.
Yuen, did you want to say something?
No, I kind of agree with Guido on that. If we can solve it, and like putting it in HTML video elements has benefits, clear benefits. So the question to me was mainly like, it seems that the difference is, in one case is HTML video element or HTML element, basically. And I wanted to know whether there was a use case for an HTML element which is not on top of the video element to enable scrolling. And my understanding is that it's not, there's no use case like that, right?
Not at the moment, no.
Okay.
And just to clarify, when we say video, we mean video or canvas, as far as hard requirement goes. And for us, that's part of the MVP. That's not something that can be solved later. And if I could just substantiate the claim here, we've discussed at length a very hypothetical case of supporting multiple different video previews with effects applied on top, even though none of us can think of any use case out in the wild. But meanwhile, we're using right now an application that needs, I'm sharing my screen, right? And here we go. Here are some annotations. So this is a realistic use case. It doesn't get any more real than that. So this is the important case to solve. This is where we should focus our attention.
But it's not based on Canvas, right?
It is.
No, but I mean the
the overlay is Canvas, right?
The overlay is Canvas. So the scope is you have a video element and you have a canvas on top. That's
yes,
scope,
but
right? It's
sure,
not like displaying the display video through Canvas and having some overlays on top or something like that.
I'm not so if the web developers from it tell me that that's a hard requirement and that they are considering a transition from video to Canvas, I believe them. Now, I'm not sure how long it's going to take, but they say it's a hard requirement. And again, Meet is not the only developers we care about. We just know that Meet is often representative of other web developers and where they're going to go soon. So if that's a realistic use case for them, it's likely a realistic use case for multiple other web developers.
To clarify, there's a use case where there's a display stream that is being painted on the canvas, and there's no video element at all, and you want to scroll
Yes.
to forward the scroll gesture from this canvas to
Yes.
the display. Okay, that's a new use case as far as I know. I never heard of
Yeah,
it.
it was news to me too, and I've now relayed it to you.
But to be clear, Elad, understanding why this is a hard requirement, I think would be useful also in terms of discussing the trade-offs.
Because they are considering making that transition, and they need to make sure that features don't break based on that.
Can you tell why they're doing that?
I
Migration?
could ask later. And again, I'm not sure if they're in the process of doing that. It's just something that's often discussed, and apparently it's got some drawbacks, some advantages. It's something web developers likely want to do occasionally. I can come back with the information of why, but I just trust that the information I got was correct, that basically there are some advantages that they keep on discussing on making that transition in order to benefit of.
It would be good to have a list. Yeah, definitely. Thanks.
Sure. Does anybody else want to say anything more? Or should I give the remaining time back to Yanivar? And again, Yanivar, thank you very much for donating your time.
Sure.
So
I think this is an important area to get right.
yes, so let me just okay. So now it's your time.
All right, let's see how much time we have. We have probably more issues to discuss than we have time, but we'll start from the top, I guess. So the first issue here is in Media Capture Screen Share, called Suggest User Agents Treat a Capture tab as visible. So the background here is that the web platform has a document.visibility state that reveals to the web page whether it's visible or hidden. Hidden could be either you're not the foremost tab, another tab is viewed instead, or you could be in a window underneath another window and you're totally occluded. But with screen capture, specifically capture of a window or tab, it's possible to capture an otherwise hidden tab or browser window. Such pages are often, sorry, Harald?
You're muted.
You're muted, Harald.
Sorry. It would be good if you're proposing things on in the meeting, you actually put them on GitHub too. I mean, I had a comment on GitHub that where I had to link to the slides in order to make the comment comprehensible. Anyway, let's go on.
What specifically proposed? Well, my slide does link to the issue at top here.
No, the slide is making a proposal, and the proposal is not on GitHub. That's what I was commenting on.
You're saying we should all proposals should be on GitHub first.
First, or at the same time, or in the immediate. I mean, everyone who's watching on GitHub needs to know that this is a proposal being made.
I agree with that, but we haven't really enforced that so far.
No, we haven't. I think we should.
Yeah. I agree, especially even including this meeting. It would have been good to have specific issues that people can go to that are clearly linked. So apologies for that. I think though that the discussion on GitHub did not reflect. I mean, I'm trying to represent the discussion on GitHub here as faithfully as possible, and I was not anticipating. I didn't see any strong arguments proposed on GitHub against aligning with Chrome behavior, so I thought it was relatively easy to propose and get resolution up. This did not seem controversial to me, but I'm happy to be proven wrong.
Oh, the only point that's controversial is dragging in window capture.
Okay, that was a surprise to me.
I mean, I don't understand what window capture has to do with tab capture in this specific agent. in this
Well,
particular thing?
I can answer that. When I, in preparing the slides, I did some tests to determine existing behavior. And I quite accidentally ran into that. At first, I verified that Chrome does keep a, well, how far did I get in the slide here? Yeah, so Chrome's tab capture, I should first say, appears to let the page think it's visible when it's captured. So I went to test that, and that seemed to be true when I used tab capture. However, I'm trying to use, I was going to test whether visibility, whether it was hidden, whether it was still visible when it should be hidden, which would have included testing when another tab was frontmost. So I tested that, and that worked. And I also tried the window occlusion test. And then I dragged out, and then I think I confused myself where I was actually had to use window capture, because I dragged the tab out to be a separate window. So I think to
that's still a tab though.
But I can drag a tab out to its own window. Then it's a window,
Yes.
right?
But if you capture a window, you capture the window Chrome too. And
Yes.
if you capture a tab, you will capture the tab, not the window Chrome. Even if the tab is its own window.
So you're saying that in Chrome, I can still use tab capture of single window browser windows?
Of course.
Okay, that was not clear to me. Sorry about that.
Mhm.
But in any case, I didn't make it clear. As a user, I didn't really think of it as that different. But I understand there's a difference in one captures the window Chrome, if you will, as well. But I
Yes,
think
and
an
of
end
course-
user,
And of course, with window capture, with window capture, you can capture a Firefox browser in Chrome.
yes. I mean, there are obvious situations where that doesn't work. I should mention Firefox already knows that it's capturing a window of itself, its own windows. So that is possible. Well, but I think, so there's a separate issue here, whether we should just be talking about tab capture or window capture. As far as this slide, I'm presenting the problem for both, because I think the problem exists for both, which is in both cases, this might otherwise, basically, it's consistent with not, so Chrome's behavior here for tab capture is consistent with not suspending or throttling the captured tab, which it seems like a good thing we all like, in that it would be weird to throttle a page that's being captured because the user agent thinks it can, because the user agent thinks it's not visible when it's actually being captured and therefore visible to remote participants, for example. And this would also help ensure that new APIs like capture surface control, which we've been discussing, doesn't leak that the page is being captured. And I also did a separate test where I wondered if the captures, the website doing the capturing, just a sub point here, that its visibility state doesn't matter, because the capture could be observed remotely in a meeting, for example. And this seems testable in the web platform test. So the proposal was to basically, well, we could also say discuss, well, what do we want to do with this? And I propose that we specify the above behavior.
So still no UN is. I'll go back on the queue.
Yeah, so when you say align the spec with above behavior, so the behavior makes sense to me, makes some sense to me at least. I was wondering whether you were saying that it would be mandatory or whether it's a guideline. I'm certainly good with guidelines. I think that guidelines both for tabs and Windows, and asking the developer to care about this case, to think about it, and probably to follow what the spec is providing as guideline is good. In terms of enforcement, I'm not quite sure. Like for tabs, you can probably do whatever you want. The user agent is in full control. But for window, the OS might be in control, for instance. So it's not always feasible, or it might not always be feasible to implement it. So that's where I'm less sure about. So main question is it hard requirement or is it guidelines? That's the first question, and both for tabs and window.
So I would be happy with should for both. I think the goal here is really to let user agents. What I think we want to avoid is that the user agent would throttle a page in one case, but keep it hidden. What we want to avoid is the web page, is the browser throttling pages that are being captured. So I don't know if that applies to window capture or not. I don't know if browsers detect whether a window in that case is. I mean, clearly it's informing the web page that it's hidden in those cases. So it seems reasonable to me to expect that they're also being throttled, which means if they're being captured, it'd be a better user experience if that was kept visible.
Should have fine with me. We can always change later if we find that it's bad. But in principle, the more guidelines we provide to these kind of things, the better it is.
All right, thanks.
Yes, so Yaniver, do I understand correctly that you agree to only talk about tabs for now and to defer a discussion of Windows for some other time?
No, I think it would be good for the spec. If it's going to be a should, I think we could say that both for tabs and Windows.
So for an opinion about window, I would need a bit more time, but I don't think that I don't really see why we can't introduce that for tabs for now if there is consensus. Of course, I don't know what what Harald is going to say next, but presuming that everybody here agrees with tab and needs more time for window, why should we not just go with that for now?
All right, thanks, Harald.
No, it was a question.
Well, let's hear from all the participants.
I'm happy with making this a must for tab even. And I think we need more. I think we need more time to discuss whether it's feasible to do this for window and what it would mean to do this for window. So I would suggest raising a new issue for that. So let's get the tab right, and let's figure out window later.
All right, thanks, Dominic.
Yeah, to clarify for window, are we talking only about browser windows of the same user agent, or are we talking about Windows in general? Because if the former, I think I can't imagine why it would be harder than it is for a tab.
Yes, I mean, my goal is not to impose impossible restrictions on browsers. I mean, it's more about the general principle that user agents do a best effort to avoid leaking capture and avoid unnecessary throttling that would be low quality.
So with macOS, we see that there is already a trend for operating systems to sometimes inject themselves into the process of getting the user to decide which window they're going to capture, and basically also facilitate this. Now, if the user agent detects that the user chose to capture a window, the user agent can then, it's like treat it like tab capture. But whether this is detectable in an easy way, or whether this requires some kind of, watermarking of the content and looking for that watermark, all depends on the operating system's own APIs, right? Whether it lets you detect easily that you're capturing one of your own windows or not. So potentially, it could be more difficult to detect that, and therefore, that's at least one reason why we might just want to keep it to tabs for now. There is incremental value, incremental progress to be made here. There is value to be, sorry, I forgot the word, but there is value here. Let's just go with what's currently in consensus and leave the other discussion for another day.
All right, Ewan?
Yeah, for instance, if a window is fully occluded, it might be that the operating system will not provide any frame, or will say that there's nothing to be done there. In that case, there's if there's no frame being generated, there's no need to unthrottle. So doing throttling there is actually good. But still, I think that we can try to say that to provide some guidelines, saying for tabs, please do that. And for Windows, consider that it's also important to keep tabs that are being part of a capture being not throttled when it makes sense. Something like that, as an advice to the implementers. And I don't think it can be enforced by spec statements. That a guideline is good there, I think.
So, Yuan, can I ask you on that point? What did you think of Harald's idea of a must for tab capture?
I'm okay with it. I think I do not see any. I mean, I'm the one that filed the initial issue, or maybe I had this initial thought that for tabs we really need to all be on the same page there. So yeah, I think it's in general, I dislike that something that is not visible is getting like more power, but there I think that it's somehow visible because it's captured. So that's fine, and I think a must is okay.
Okay, we have Tim, quickly.
Yeah, I don't see any need for doing it for window, and I think it should be on tab. I don't like the idea that it sometimes works on window and sometimes doesn't. It's kind of hard to explain to users, and so I think it would be clearer to be much more clear cut at this point and just doing it on tabs only.
And you're happy with a must?
Oh yes, I think that would be good.
Okay. Elad, last minute.
Yeah, is there anything except for document visibility state, like blur state or anything like that we might also want to? We can take it as a follow-up, but just let's consider whether there are other similar properties that also need to be adjusted.
Well, those are events of fire, I think. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, probably Chrome engineers know exactly what they are doing there in terms of throttling and so on. So getting the full list would be great before we make the PR. That's a good point.
All right, so for resolution, I'm hearing focus on tab capture for now with a must statement. Is that general agreement?
Yeah, and could there be an action item, for instance, on Elad to try to get the full list of properties? Because you're probably the one that is in the best position.
I'm happy to leave it to Yanivar to provide the full list.
All right, okay. Yeah, so but if you could email me your concerns. You mentioned blur and another thing, right?
That was the only one that I'm aware of.
Okay, all right, thanks so much. I think that's all I have time for today.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Hey, see you later.